Greetings and welcome back. We are in Senior AP English and we are talking now with Hamlet 3:1 and we're continuing with our observations. We are just at the point where Polonius has told his daughter, take this book and fake out Hamlet. Pretend like you're reading. That show will kind of fool Hamlet into believing that you weren't supposed to be here. And then he says, 'tis too much proved, we are off to blame in this. 'Tis too much proved that with devotion's visage and pious action we do sugar o'er the devil himself. You want to fool somebody. You want to fool the devil. All you need are two things. A face that looks honest and actions that look pure. And you can fake out the devil himself. Which of course we know from those lines from Macbeth of Act 4 when King Duncan will say about the traitor, there is no art to find the mind's construction in the face. Shakespeare's plays, especially his tragedies, resurrect the question of how do you know who you can trust? Put it in your notes at 3A. No single play is this more apparent than his classic Othello, where Iago is called honest some 70 plus times. And Iago, of course, the worst of Shakespeare's villains, many will argue, although some of you studying Lear recognized that Edmund's not, he's no slouch either, right? Out vile jelly, he had to watch his old man's eyes be torn out of his sockets and thrown onto the stage floor and stomped on top of. That gets you about as bad as Shakespeare ever did on stage. That gets about as bad. But Iago is a pretty bad villain, and yet he's completely trusted by Othello. Completely. Othello trusts him 100%. The observation here by Polonius is you can fool the devil if you can fake it well enough that even the devil doesn't understand. To which the king will say two things. Oh, 'tis too true. But then he will turn in an aside and he will speak directly to the audience. Look what he says. How smart a lash. That speech, what Polonius just said, doth give my conscience. Whoa. What's significant about this one line? Think about it.
He's feeling good.
Right, which tells the audience what? He did it. This is significant. To this point, the audience is kind of working off of the assumption that he really did do it. Now we know that he did it in the aside. In other words, the king is admitting, I did it. Keep reading. The harlot's cheek, the prostitute's face, beautified with plastering art. Maybelline. We're going to come back to this whole thing of ladies and makeup. It will become the source of a lot of fighting, you can imagine. He will say, a prostitute, a harlot, can put makeup on her face, beautiful, plastered with plastering art, but that is not more ugly to the thing that helps it than is my deed to my most painted word. What has he just said? Put it in your own words. Don't worry about reading that sidebar. Try and figure it out for yourself. It's a powerful word picture. What is it that he says? Any suggestions here? What's he say? In the same way that a prostitute covers her face to look pure and yet is sexually not pure, he says what?
Covering his word.
I'm covering my actions with my words. Right? And now all of a sudden words starts to have double and triple meanings for us. Several things happening here simultaneously. One, the audience recognizes Claudius did it. Two, he feels guilty about it, which means he has a conscience. He even said that. Look how he finishes this. Oh, heavy burden. Right? Now, earlier, you'll remember, we pointed out that there's going to be this moment later in Act 3 when King Claudius will fall down on the front of the stage and he'll be praying to God for some kind of forgiveness. Right? My words fly up, my thoughts remain below is the way that scene will end. That is set up by this very scene here. Then they all will leave. Polonius will say, I hear him coming, let's withdraw, my lord. And Hamlet will come onto the stage. Now let's point out, this is an interesting soliloquy because Hamlet is alone, but he's not alone. Right? It's one of those important moments. Hamlet is alone, but he's not alone. Polonius and King Claudius are hiding behind the curtains. Ophelia is ready to come on stage in just a second. We've just heard this one line, one set of lines from Polonius, and now the famous soliloquy of Hamlet. Many argue the most famous words written in the English language, certainly some of those popular in terms of well-known. Let's now look at these lines and try to see something below the epidermis. The great French writer Voltaire came to this play, and he loved it immediately. He was completely fluent in English. He loved this play. In fact, he immediately recognized it as a valuable artifact of civilization already. But he wanted to translate it into French so that Frenchmen could read this play and understand what was going on. He had no problems translating this play, he said, right up into these lines. When he read, because Voltaire was a philosopher, when he read the opening lines of the soliloquy, to be or not to be, that is the question. And it took him weeks to try to figure out how to translate what was being said to be or not to be. Let's look at the lines and then we'll come back to exegete. To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing in them. To die, to sleep, no more. And by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. To die, to sleep, perchance to dream. Ah, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of despised love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin? Who would fardels bear, to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns, puzzles the will, and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. Thus, conscience does make cowards of us all. And thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought. And enterprise is a great pitch and moment. With this regard their currents turn awry and lose the name of action. Now, we don't have as much time as I would wish to exegete, but let's work through it at least to get some sense of it. This set of lines, notice, lying right at the center of the play, in the middle of the play in Act 3. We've been watching, if we are an audience, nonstop, we've been watching this play now going on for over an hour and 40 plus minutes, depending upon, how many lines are edited out. And now Hamlet will come to the front of the stage alone, or so he thinks, and he says, to be or not to be, that is the question. Right away, what does he mean by that? To be or not to be, that is the question. Jot down in your notes any number of possible meanings of what he's saying. Quite literally, by the way, what is he saying? Yeah, to live or to die. Notice he continues, whether 'tis nobler in the mind. We have an option here, don't we? Right? An option. On the one hand, is it nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune? Coming back to earlier lines when he called fortune, remember, a slut, and Rosencrantz and Guildenstern did that. Now fortune, however, is used in a far more serious cadence. On the one hand, is it more noble to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing in them? What does arms mean? Fighting. That is to say, dying. So in other words, you have an option. This is the theodicy question. How come bad things happen to good people? And what should you do about, bad things happening to good people? What should happen when something terrible happens to you? How should you respond? Two options. One, you suffer and you put up with it. The other is you end it. Take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing in them. And then he says to die, to sleep. Notice these dualities. To sleep. He says it again, no more. And by a sleep, to say we end the heartache and the 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to. In other words, sometimes life gets so terrible that it almost seems as if it would just be nice to just go to sleep and never wake up. Whoa, where are we again? We're back to the two solid flesh. Remember from Act 1? Oh, that the two solid flesh would thaw, melt itself into a dew, or that Providence had not fixed his canon against what? We don't call it suicide there. What do we call it? Self-slaughter. We're back to this theme of suicide again. This will be one of the central motifs of the play. Hamlet asks, dude, when things get really wretched, why not just off yourself? Dying is like sleeping, he says it, he's musing. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished, to die, to sleep. But then he pauses, perhaps to dream. And then he catches himself, because he knows it's Dante. There's the rub, right? What dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. What's he say? Put it in your own words. We would kill ourselves, but what? We're a little bit freaked out about what might happen. Think of it this way. I'm living in total hell. I'll kill myself. Dante says, really? You think this is total hell? Wait till after you go. That is to say, what dreams may come on the other side. What happens on the other side? Notice it's something that we're not completely sure of. Notice to that degree, we pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long a life. In other words, that's why we don't do it. The human existential condition is one of suffering. You'll remember the first teaching of the Gautama Buddha after enlightenment was to say life is dukkha, the Hindu word, the Vedic word, suffering. And Hamlet says the same thing. Life sucks. So why not just off yourself? There's this thing called afterlife. And we don't know what's coming in the afterlife. And to that degree, it makes us pause. To that degree, he says, that's why we bear, notice, the whips and scorns of time. A nice little list here of all the terrible things that have happened to Hamlet. The oppressor's wrong. We obviously think of his uncle. The proud man's contumely. A contumely is your face. Obviously, we think of Hamlet's uncle. The pangs, this is important because of what's just about to happen. See what he says? The pangs of despised love. See, Hamlet's giving us a list of all the things that are crappy in his life. And one of the things crappy in his life, of course, is this whole thing of despised love. He assumes that Ophelia does not love him anymore. That will explain to some degree the events that we're about to study. Notice the law's delay, obviously. His father's been murdered and the offender has not been punished. The insolence of office, we think again of his uncle. The spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes. Why would he put up with all of that when he himself might his quietus, freedom, make with a bare bodkin, a knife? In other words, a blade, an empty blade. You can end everything. Why wouldn't you do that? He asks the question a second time. Who would fartles bear huge weights? To grunt and sweat under a weary life. Why would you grunt and sweat under a weary life? But that the dread, that's a key word. And the existentialist of the 20th century will play a lot of word games with the word dread, beginning with Freud. What is dread? If you dread the rest of your day, what does that mean? It's more than fear, isn't it? Right? It's a deep-rooted anxiety that will not so easily be solved. Notice he calls it the dread of something after death. The undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns puzzles the will and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. Put it in your own words. What's he say? It's not that life is great.
But we have no idea.
We got no idea what's coming afterwards. So we stick with this because what's coming afterwards could be worse. And to that degree, we kind of just put up with life. Telling us a lot about Hamlet's mental state at this point. Thus, he says, conscience, thinking, makes cowards of us all. And thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with a pale cast of thought. The guy says, that's it, I'm going to call her. I'm picking up the phone right now, I'm calling her right now. Well, it's probably better to wait a couple of hours. Because in a couple of hours, dinner will be over, and then I'm going to call her. I'm going to call her in a couple of hours. Probably today is not the best. Tomorrow morning is the best time to call. I'm going to call tomorrow morning. Probably lunch is better than morning. I'm going to go lunch to, you know what? It's probably better to wait a couple, you know what? I'm going to wait a week. I'll call in a week. This is the human condition. We make up our mind we're going to do something. Our cheeks get red, flushed. We're ready to do it. But we start thinking. Think. And the minute we start thinking, our resolution is sicklied o'er with a pale cast of thought, and the native hue, I'm going to do this, turns pale. We wait long enough, we can outthink ourselves, and then it doesn't get done. We could easily take a few minutes at 3B and jot down the last time this happened for us. For some of us, it was just a few hours ago, where we were thoroughly convinced we were going to do something, and then think. Shakespeare has captured a certain philosophic, psychological reality for us. But let's point out, this is this play. How so? How so? Yes, Hamlet's been words. The entire stinking play. Dude, how hard is it? Your old man got jacked by your uncle, who you hate anyway. Go jack him. How hard is it? Sneak in there while he's sleeping or something and just bung the guy. Who cares? It's over and then we're done and you've taken care of it. Notice the second soliloquy of Act 2. He beats himself up for not doing what he should do. Who calls me a coward? Who plucks my beard and slaps me across the pate? It must be that I am pigeon-livered and lack gall. He says, what's wrong with me? Why can't I do what I want to do? Which is a fascinating question. It begs the question of this. How come some people seem to have more self-will than other people? Are some people born more disciplined than other people? And how do you account for that? Some people can say, I'm going to do X, and they actually do it. And other people say, I'm going to do X, and it never gets done. How do you account for that? Is it a function of DNA? How come some people can say, I'm going to do something, and they actually do it? Athletes struggle with this. Some athletes can say, I'm going to train, and they do it. Other athletes say, I'm going to train, and it never consistently happens. Why is that? Is it a function of our DNA and who we are? Are some people just born more determined than other people? And for many years, I told this story because it was so germane to I had a colleague who's a chain smoker. He would light one cigarette off of the other cigarette. It was so hard for him to go even for a few minutes without smoking. And in 7th grade, his daughter is crying, and he asks her, "What's wrong, honey?" And she says, "I'm really sad." And he says, "Why?" And she says, "Because I love to play volleyball, and I'm really sad. You're not going to get to watch me play volleyball when I am a senior." He's like, "What are you talking about?" And she said, "In school today, they told us about smoking, and they said, you're going to die." And my colleague takes his cigarettes, and he throws them in the trash in front of her. He never smokes another cigarette. I tell this story to smokers, and they're like, "That can't happen. That's totally impossible. No one can quit who's that addicted to nicotine. No one can quit cold turkey." And I say, "My pal did it. Just like that. Bam, it was done." Immediately starts having heart problems. They go to the doctor. He says, "Dude, your blood pressure is through the roof. You're going to have to exercise every day for the rest of your life, or you're going to die of a heart attack because of, the smoking addiction that you had." Every morning this cat gets up and he goes for runs. When it's 11 below zero, you can see him running. Every morning he gets up, and he's done it for over 20 years. How do you account for that? Where does that level of commitment come from? Was that guy born with that? Or did he decide? Is it a function of thinking or doing? Let's put that one in our notes too. There's so many, guys, thousands of pages have been written on these lines. One of them is this thought or question. There's two kinds of people, it seems. There are thinkers and there are doers. Thinkers are the ones that like to sit around and muse. What shall we do? Let's think about it. Let's create all kinds of potential formulae. Then there are the doers. If there's a problem, we do it. We fix it. Now, let's go. Are you born to be one of the kinds or the other? Of course, thinkers and doers, when you put them together, they sometimes don't work out so well. The thinker is very interested in thinking. The doer's like, dude, are you kidding me? Let's just finish this. Let's go. And the thinker's like, no, we need to think. Wait, we could, right? The last time you were with your pals as a group and somebody said, let's go do this, did you go, yeah? Or are you more inclined to say, that would be scanned. Hamlet will say it later. I got to think about this. Hamlet is an intellectual. He's a thinker. He's not instinctive. He's not a doer. And he says, because that's the case, we start out saying, I'm going to do these things, and then we end up kind of going, well, I'll do it later. The whole theme of procrastination is buried here. Are we born procrastinators, or do we learn it as a survival skill set? Is sickly Dora with the pale cast of thought in enterprises of great pitch and moment with this regard their currents turn awry and lose the name of action. We come up with great plans, but then things go south. And why do they go south? Think. Watch The Genius of Shakespeare. Hamlet has been playing the thinking game and not the doing game for the whole play. Ophelia comes onto the stage and he immediately switches. And he's no longer the thinker. Now he's the doer. He does what is instinctive, and it is brutal. Fascinating. He stops being a thinker, and he starts being a doer, and the minute he does it, somebody gets jacked really badly. Who? Ophelia, who comes onto the stage. He calls her a nymph, which is, of course, going to have double meanings. A mermaid, which would be, of course, a woman who would sleep with sailors as she's drowning them. To which he then says, in thy orisons be all my sins remembered. Please pray for me. Ophelia is uncertain as to why Hamlet's nuts. She's clearly worried about him. She comes up to him and she says, how does your honor for this many a day? I humbly thank you. Now it's not words. It's well. Ophelia says, I have remembrances of yours that I have longed to redeliver. I pray you now receive them. A little ring, a little folded note. She's breaking up with him. Now the plan here is, when she does this, he's going to say, no, I'm in love with you. I thought you didn't want to see me. No, I don't want to break up. That's the thought, right? As she hands it. Hamlet's response is, not me. I didn't give you those. Now, the way this is set up on stage is important because you got to be able to see both Hamlet and Ophelia's face, because when Hamlet says, I didn't give you that stuff, she's like, yes, you did, right? I never gave you aught. I didn't give you that stuff. She says, my honored lord, you know right well you did. And with them, words of so sweet breath composed as made the things more rich. Not only did you give me these things, you spoke nice words to me. Their perfume lost, take these again. She says, for to the noble mind, rich gifts wax poor when givers prove unkind. There. In other words, you not only gave me these things, you promised me you loved me. Now that you're acting like a complete jerk, the gifts don't mean anything anymore. I'm giving them back to you. It's at this point Hamlet kind of backs away from her and he looks at her and he asks her an intriguing question. Are you honest? Now let's be clear. He doesn't ask this in Mandarin or in Russian. He's speaking the English language. She knows what the words mean. Are you honest? And she says, yes, I am. I am always honest. I always tell the truth. No. What does she do? Are you honest? She goes, huh? What? Huh? I don't understand what, huh? Hamlet asks, are you fair? Now here, fair does not mean just, it means beautiful. We'll come back tomorrow to ask, what is Hamlet getting at with this lines from Ophelia?